The Justice Department has released former special counsel Jack Smith's report on the investigation into the Trump election interference case.
Mr. Smith's final report, sent to Congress just a little after midnight last night, argues that President Trump would have been convicted if he had not won the presidential race in 2024. Smith writing, quote, "It has long been the department's interpretation that the Constitution forbids the federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president. But for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial."
I'm sure he thinks so. Meanwhile, Trump, who had tried to block the report's release, responding on Truth Social, deranged Jack Smith, which was his wrestling name, was unable to successfully prosecute the political opponent of his boss, crooked Joe Biden. The voters have spoken.
So the newly released report is one of two volumes put together by Smith. Volume 2 is regarding the classified documents case. Attorney General Merrick Garland said he would not release that since two of the co-defendants are still facing prosecution.
Let's bring in Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, so Jack Smith thinks he would have got a conviction. Aside from that, which most prosecutors think, what's your takeaway from what you've digested?
Well, this report is vintage Jack Smith. It shows an absolute disregard for the controlling decisions of the Supreme Court. Two decisions really undermined his case, and he sort of dismisses both of them. One dealt with obstruction, one dealt with immunity. He minimized both of those. In one case, he adopted the view of Justice Jackson in what was called the Fisher case on obstruction. And that was a view and a concurrence that no one joined. It was just Justice Jackson. And he basically said, I can still argue obstruction, even though most of us believed that that was pretty much blocked by the Supreme Court. But this report really says more about Smith. It reads more like a defense argument than a prosecution argument, but he's defending himself. You know, he says it's laughable that he was engaged in politics. Well, that's not the view of a lot of people. I mean, because we saw virtually everything in this report before. He released much of this before the election. None of us could understand the rationale for releasing it publicly, except to influence the election, and it didn't work.
Well, yeah, he wanted the rest of the process as well because he knew what would happen if Donald Trump was elected. But I just can't get over the fact that he finally addressed the peaceful and patriotically remark that the former president made and his response to it was, but he said fight, fight, fight 10 times after that. I thought that was so ridiculous. What did you make of that?
I agree, Lawrence. I thought that was, once again, vintage Smith, where you're like, you know, this is such a weak case. The word fight is used by politicians regularly. You've had Democratic politicians say that Trump should be eliminated. They said this was a war to defend democracy. And all that Smith can offer is, you know, he used the word fight 10 times. It's like, okay. You know, and that followed his saying, you know, go there peacefully. The fact is that he might have been able to acquire a conviction in front of a favorable jury and a very favorable judge. But in my view, he would never have been able to sustain this. And that's why I've referred to him as something of a parade general. You know, this is very impressive when you don't have the other side. This is his best case. And I don't think it's that good.
Yeah, you notice that he had Senator Menendez. He had the same thing with Senator Menendez overcharged, and he was accused as being the governor of Virginia, and John Edwards, right? So this is a pattern with him. He thinks he's getting victory. It doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, and Jonathan, also, while he did take a shot and say, look, Hunter Biden traded on his name, made all this money over years, you know, Mr. Weiss investigated Hunter Biden for years, and he takes particular umbrage at his boss, the president, and says that the president said stuff that simply was not true and undermined the confidence in our legal system.
Yeah, the Weiss report is really interesting when these are bookends, and they're very different. Smith destroyed his own case against Trump. He had a straightforward case in Florida that he loaded up with classified document charges and other things that slowed it to a crawl and guaranteed he'd never get into trial. Weiss did the opposite. He wasn't aggressive enough, but he has one claim that Smith does not. He actually saw the inside of a courtroom. and he got a conviction. And he would have gotten a second conviction if it wasn't for the president's pardon. Yeah. But the Weiss report is incredibly damning towards the president as much as his son.
Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.